Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm sharing my learnings with you so that you can learn and I can learn better as well. I'm excited to share with you this video that was presented on the TFT Coaching Plus program by Aesah. He invited Ripple Overdrive, who is a Set 16 Tier 1 player, six-time regionals player, regularly 1500 to 1600 LP. And in this presentation that Ripple put together, he's going to talk about evaluating early game unit strength, which I was actually very pleasantly surprised by what I was able to get out of this video, specifically early on in a set when there's a lot of missing stats, sample size is low, we're not exactly sure what's strong. Ripple puts together a very clear framework on how you can approach figuring out situations where you're trying to decide between should I play this 1-star 3 cost or this 2-star 1 cost, and how you go about making trade-offs in putting together your strongest board in the early game. So with that said, I am going to play this video for you. I also take notes on the side, and I'll provide a link in the description below to my notes for Ripple's presentation. So with that said, I hope you enjoy this video with Ripple.
The topic today is evaluating early game unit strength, or just evaluating unit strength in general. Give some context. Most games, you don't roll until at least level 6. In this set in particular, I think design-wise, they are encouraging you to play for tempo level 8 or level 9. So, on the way there, you really only have your natural shops to work with. And you're pretty much challenged most rounds to try to make your strongest board while also making econ with whatever you get. Most games you'll get some 2 or 3 costs early, and you have to decide to hold, buy, or sell them. You might have to sell them for 1 cost pairs to make 2 stars, or just to make econ. Early game in TFT, I think like analyzing this part of the game, it's one easier than later parts of the game, because early in TFT, there's not that many things you can do. There's only so many shops that you get, and some units you can't even buy because they don't even like match with traits, or you don't even have pairs for them. So it's easy to see like how many options there are to analyze, but because there's like not that many, I think every action you take becomes kind of more impactful. Like sometimes you might sell a unit that you realize you kind of needed like a turn or two later. Holding a unit or not pretty much decides if you can go down like certain lines because of the traits that you can play with that unit. And making the correct like strongest board will pretty much determine if you get to win streak or not. And yeah, I think being able to evaluate how strong every unit is on your board is a valuable skill that you can't really learn from stats. Most stat sites are going to show you what endgame boards are strong, what comps to aim towards getting to, but it doesn't really tell you how to get there. A large part of the way you get there, is like by having enough HP and gold by the time you actually need to do your roll down, which you have to do by pretty much managing your natural shops and whatever you get out of orbs from neutrals. I think the goal from being able to like evaluate all these unit strengths is that you can always find your strongest board, especially when the game gives you lots of options to choose from. There are some games where most games usually get like 3-2 costs or 2-3 costs, but some games, like especially on like Scuttle or something, you might just get like a ton of units and you might get really lost. Or maybe you're playing Cluttered Mine or something. And like the more options you have, the harder it gets, but you really want to be able to try and make your strongest board. If you can do that, you can better control your streaks and HP, because this pretty much goes into board strength valuation, right? Every round, you should in general be scouting your pool to see how strong you are compared to them, so you know if you win or not. If you have options like leveling or slamming items, the better you're aware of how strong your units are versus like other boards will help inform if you really need to level or not, or if you can like hold a slam. Also, if you learn more about the inner workings of a unit and how to like maximize their strength through things like positioning, then you get to win these fights that are pretty much decided by positioning and not just by like who's stronger. And then once you can get a solid understanding of how like, these units work, what makes them strong, how strong they are, it'll make it easier for you to navigate like different patches because every patch they're going to change some units, and then sometimes like people automatically think like, oh, just because they nerfed it, like maybe the unit's like gutted and you shouldn't play them anymore. But or maybe if they buffed it a little, the difference between them being OP or just like playable. I think knowing how strong the unit is will like make patches less jarring because you have a better intuitive understanding of like how much stronger the unit really got. Maybe by its design it'll always be strong. Yeah, and then yeah, I think in general, this is a lot of stuff to think about, but just like getting better at any of these things and incrementally will help you play your game out better. And it's the difference between getting to level 6, 7, and 8 with like 10 more HP or 10 more gold, which is like, is really impactful. It could be like a whole placement or even more. So, yeah, I think there are lots of games where you get to 4-2 or something, and you feel like you don't have enough gold to roll, but you don't have enough HP to like wait until 4 or 5. And a large part of that could have been because you weren't playing a strong enough board early with what you had to uh, be in a better spot, I guess. And so here are some questions that you kind of want to be able to answer. By learning more about units. One of the biggest ones probably is like, what are the best 3 costs to hold early? So, almost every game you'll probably get 3 costs or 2 costs, and you probably have to choose to sell them to hold 1 cost or to hold them. And some of them are really strong in stage 2, but some of them actually like holding them will probably make your stage 2 really weak. And it was probably better off for you to hold 1 cost. Or a lot of times you're in situations where you have like multiple different carries of similar cost, like say a 1-star 3 cost and a 2-star 1 cost. They're both worth the same gold. Which one should you itemize? Itemizing the right one can make the difference between winning or losing, so it's important to know. Based on an opener, part of the reason you decide where to hold a unit or not is that it plays into certain lines. So certain units have better direction than other units, and that will have to do with their traits as well as how they scale later. Knowing your board is strong enough to win streak, that can also determine your line. I think some lines are better from high tempo spots because you need more golden HP. Maybe they aren't like win out lines, but like you can save HP throughout most of the game. But that starts with how strong you are on 2-1. Also, like some augments are better on 2-1 depending on how strong your board is. I think in general, like when your board is weak, you prefer econ augments so you can spike later. When your board is strong, you prefer things like items or combat because then you can take advantage of winning in stage 2. But that depends if you know how strong your units are, right? It's not always just like, oh, do I have enough upgrades? Sometimes it could be like a 1-star 3 cost is actually a pretty strong unit that can actually streak on. And then what's my next strongest unit? I think a lot of times level 4 is usually like kind of simple where it's like, oh, I'll play like 2 tank trait, 2 damage trait. Level 5 might be a little more confusing sometimes to find out like what's the best next unit to add. This can also happen at level 3 or level 4, but just an example, like once you have your like 2 backline, 2 frontline, it's like what I would put it on 5 and what I would put it on 6. Usually it might be like a 3 cost or something, but maybe it's actually a trait unit. Um, Overall, we're just trying to make the strongest board possible with the shops and units that we've received at like any point. So like 2-5, we've gotten like 5 shops and units out of the orbs. 3-1, we've gotten like 8 shops and units out of the orbs and krugs. And we need to be making econ this whole time, right? So we need to be balancing, like trying to make a strong board versus, holding units or selling ones that aren't going to be useful for us. Okay. Yeah, that was a lot of text and talking. So here's how I go about it. Points here that I talk about, you can use to evaluate honestly units at any cost or at any point in the game. I'll probably focus more on lower cost units just because earlier in the game there's like less things going on. Later in the game you get more traits, more interactions. Things like AoE will like of course be better. You also have way more items to scale off of, so um, it's a lot harder to just evaluate a single unit, right? So first thing I always start off every set is just reading all your units. How strong are they on paper? You read their ability, their traits. Um, even like base stats can be important, but I think most like carries not or most units nowadays have pretty standardized base stats amongst like tanks, melee carries, range carries, and stuff. So for tanks, I mostly worry about like what their ability does. Usually, it gives them more effective HP through healing versus shielding. I I think this is an important point because like healing is countered usually by like some anti-heal. Also, healing and shielding are both stats that can be used like efficiently or inefficiently. Like you don't want a tank that heals to heal when they're at full HP, right? Um, or if they heal like sometimes they heal too much and it just like you get like over healing, right? Um, versus like a unit that shields. Depending on how much they shield, you want to make sure that they're getting hit and like using all that shield before the shield expires. Um, Carries, I think you mostly just look at their DPS, how their damage is dealt, and we'll talk about that later. What kind of items they can use. Some units are more flexible items than others. Some units like need certain items to function properly, and also like their survivability. This mostly comes for like melee carries. Some melee carries need to be positioned in certain ways to like maximize their value, but depending on positioning, like they might get targeted sooner because you can't like protect them with your tanks. Um, So that's mostly like just the unit itself and their ability. They also have their traits, of course. Um, I think tank traits historically have been like pretty the same about how they worked. So Bruiser has usually been like a pretty strong early game trait because it gives your whole team flat HP. Um, well, let's compare it to Warden, which first of all is just a selfish trait. It only helps the Wardens and it gives percent HP shield. And usually things that have like percent scaling will scale better with like items and star levels and stuff. So generally, I think early game like flat stats are slightly stronger than things with percent scaling, unless you do have like the items to support it, right? But like I think usually if you have no tank items, then maybe probably like a two bruiser frontline will probably give you more tankiness than like a two warden frontline if like say the star levels and costs were like this similar. Um, Defender gives you flat resist, but also the defenders like themselves get more resist. Resist do like multiply themselves or scale better effectively with more HP and stuff. So it's kind of somewhere in between. Um, for carry traits, there are traits like Arcanist and Invoker that give team wide stuff. Um, so depending on if you have like other units that scale well with AP, then Arcanist might be better. Versus like Invoker, it kind of depends on like how much your units care about casting more than once in the fight, I would say. And say like Quick Striker gives team wide attack speed, while Gunslinger is also just like a selfish trait, similar to Warden. So I think these are all things that you can consider because of how your team composition is made up early, especially like level 5 or 6. And even like later in the game, right? Like team wide traits are usually pretty nice later in the game also. And then utility. So like not everyone just does damage or tanks damage. Some people do things like CC or healing, or CC is like stunning or chilling. Also, like some units have traits that offer utility that are pretty strong. So yeah, I think all this is stuff you think about when reading about the unit on paper. Um, I'll mostly be talking about units this set, but I'll just show like historically like two of my favorite units that I played as like kind of threats. Like I play on any board. Um, I think Gragas from like this is the Gragas from set 10, who's a 2 cost. And his ability was like, I mean, he only needs 40 mana, and then he heals 500. So I would just put Gragas off on the side, let him get hit first because he's always going to cast because it only costs 40 mana, and then he pretty much heal 500 and be worth like 1300 HP, which I thought was really good for like a unit with, even if I played him with like no traits. Um, on the carry side, like Yasuo, I mean, was a mentor edgelord. You rarely ever play edgelord early because those units were 2 cost. And then I mean, mentor was a good team wide trait, but I think Yasuo, you read his ability, it just says hit 3 units for 150, and he casts a lot because he's like a fighter with low mana, and I think it's just his DPS was like potential was really high, and also he had high like base armor, MR, and HP. So like I think he'd be better sometimes than playing say like your 2 trait for your carry, just because him by himself does like 2,000 damage a fight, and in the early game like 2,000 damage makes up like a third of the enemy's like board HP. Um, so uh, an example for this set would be let's talk about Blitzcrank and Loris. We'll probably have a situation where we have 2-star 1 cost like Blitzcrank or a 1-star 3 cost like Loris. So what I would do is just hover their abilities, see how much they shield, also look at their HP. I think a 2-star 1 cost generally has like 300, maybe 200 more HP than like a 1-star 3 cost. Um, So you can take that into account, and then how their tank traits work. Both of them have selfish tank traits, and you can assume you only have like the two trait for them, or maybe even the 0 trait for them. But just looking at the numbers, like Blitzcrank at 2-star will shield for 400, and Loris at 1-star will shield for 700. I guess you can say the difference is made up by like probably the HP difference. So then like how do we break the tie? Well, I think Loris will offer also Piltover, which is a really strong utility trait at 2. So if you can hold him, like if it doesn't really matter if you're trying to play Zon that much, then like I would probably prefer Loris because he has pretty similar tankiness to Blitzcrank. You can 2-star him later, and he has a pretty good utility trait. But of course, it's like depending on what other units you have. But also, I think another thing to point out is that like just like reading Loris's ability, he's kind of like the Gragas that I showed earlier, where you know whether or not you have Warden active, like it doesn't really affect that he's gonna cast and shield for 700 um, on your board, which I think just makes him like a really strong unit on his own. Um, Here's another example. So say let's compare 2-3 cost Leona versus Loris. Leona is the Targon unit, so she already has like slightly higher base stats than Loris. And I'll say like, oh, it's pretty obvious that Leona is probably designed to be the strongest 3 cost early. But I think probably when you approach stage 3, or you're in stage 3, maybe early stage 4, you might prefer Loris just because of how like Leona's ability works. So she reduces instances of damage by 15, 48, or 40, depending on her star level. This is strong in the early game because most damage is dealt in small amounts because like units just aren't that strong yet. A lot of damage is auto attack damage, depending on what kind of spells there are. I mean, she would do poorly versus burst spells, but better versus spells that deal in small ticks. So it does depend on what your opponents are playing, but usually later in the game, once carries get more itemized, they will be hitting in like larger amounts, which would make Leona's passive, weaker as the game goes on. So I think like towards the later into the mid game, Loris might actually become better just because like he has pretty much a reliable like he shields a large amount of HP, and versus Leona like really will get worse depending on how strong people's carries are. Um, and then like utility wise, I guess Loris, depends if you're playing Pilter or not. He'll give you utility. He also stun. Leona you play if you want some burn. But I think just looking at their tankiness, that's how I would evaluate it. Okay. I'm gonna pause. Is there any questions you'll have? Okay. Sounds good.
So if you have like
Oh, yeah.
Loris and Leona stage 1, you can only hold one of them. Which one will you hold?
Which one do I hold? That's a good question. Honestly, I might consider even playing both. I mean, I talk about how Loris can be played by itself, and I mean, Leona obviously wants to be played by herself, like can be played by herself. But I think if you had both of them, I guess it depends what other. I think it depends what other units you have. You say you probably play 2 carry units. Then you play Leona plus something, or Loris plus a Warden. If you had Piltover, you probably want to play Loris. I mean, I think I want to try find a way to play both. Also, like finding another Warden. I guess there's no 1-cost Wardens, but if I had to sell one, then I would think that Leona is best in stage 2. But if I looked around and I thought like even with Leona that I'd lose, I would think that Loris probably has better scaling later into the game and he's still like pretty good. So I would keep Loris if I felt weaker than a good amount of people in the lobby. If that makes sense.
With Loris's large shield, would you consider solo frontlining him to make sure it's not wasted?
Yes. I think yeah, units with shields, I think you definitely want to like try to get them targeted as much as possible without them dying before they cast their shield. So Loris has like needs 70 mana, so I guess there's a chance he might die before he gets his shield. But if he doesn't, then yeah, I'll try to have him take as much aggro as possible. Also to like use the full shield duration. He has to deplete it all in 4 seconds. So if you can get that, I think that'd be the best. I think like something I've liked to do positioning wise, let me just like open up a full board. If you were to put like let me just put 2 carries on each side, like something like this. Sorry, let's put Leona and Loris. I'll just give them to Leonas. Like I think like I said, you with or without items, Loris will always shield 700. Leona probably scales better with items because it's like she has flat damage reduction, and then like the more the resistances she has, she'll scale better. So you might want to like be putting your items on Leona, but like to get still full value out of Loris, like you don't want him to cast and then he's shielding for 700, but Leona is like taking all the aggro, right? So like you could do something like this, which feels a little awkward, or like sometimes I might do something like this where like they might be they split aggro, but yeah, I'm sure that like Loris will like get a good amount off his shield or something. Or if I know Loris will live like to cast and his full duration, then like make him you make him like take aggro first. Because really you just want the tanks to like get the full value out of their abilities. Leona like doesn't have a shield or heal, so she will always reduce whatever damage she's getting hit by at any point in the fight. But Loris, will only shield for 4 seconds of the fight. So yeah, I do think like there's something value in getting like Loris, whether or not he's your main tank or not, hit first or focused.
Loris has an interesting last line where it says it forces nearby units to target him, but it's not really that clear, like what nearby units means.
Yeah, I think it's a taunt, but you don't know the range of the taunt.
Yeah, I guess
So
we'll know
I'm not
eventually.
sure
But
if he
think
dashes here, he gets taunted.
I think in past sets it's generally meant 2 hexes when they've referred to that, but of course, like they could do it differently. It's just like the past sets.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think also like even if he does like taunt, I mean, I guess maybe it's not as much of a problem as him. So like maybe you can have an off tank, but I still think you want to cast during like a like I think casting later in the fight is probably worse than casting earlier in the fight. Just because you want to like you want like Leon to die for like almost die, and then he casts, and then like maybe you want her to survive as long as possible, like with your Loris, right? So I think like getting the mana generation from him taking damage is probably better than waiting until he autos enough to cast and then taunt. But yeah, I guess for Loris specifically, he is easier to play around because of the taunt. And I didn't talk about like there's like the stun portion. So against melee carries, you probably focus a lot harder on like making sure he starts near their melee carry. Any other questions? So we read like what they do, sorry, what the units do, just like by their numbers. I just talked a bit about positioning and like how the units play out, and I think you can do that for like every unit, right? So yeah, I think another part of determining how strong a unit is and how good they are is what their design and fight pattern is. So do certain units need to be positioned a certain way to maximize like the value of their ability? It was mostly for AoE units. And then how good are they in like ideal versus non-ideal positioning? So like a unit that has AoE that can hit up to 2 or 3 units, I think if they are hitting always 2 or 3 units versus one, then they're probably performing above average from their counterparts. And if they're hitting one, they're probably performing below average. But sometimes this is like not always the case. Maybe like just because of balancing, they're just really strong, even if they're always hitting one unit. And then another thing you asked about was like how efficient is the unit's damage dealt or tanked. Some units deal damage in large bursts, which can be wasted in overkill, while other units deal damage really consistently. I think like I've always liked consistent damage dealers because yeah, they don't really waste any damage. It's a pretty good idea. Pretty easy to tell how strong they are, and you don't really have to set them up well. While units that like deal damage in large bursts, um, sometimes you just see them like last hit a unit at 1 HP a bunch of times, and that's probably the reason you lost the fight. This can also be applied to how they tank. You don't really want units to be shielding or healing when they're at full HP, which can happen if you don't like split your aggro well, or they don't have like taunt mechanic. So, if you're gonna play a unit on your board like over another unit because they like shield or heal a lot, you want to make sure that they're actually maximizing that. And doing this is the difference between like winning or losing some fights. Just what I talked before, so does the unit deal damage in bursts, AoE, or consistent DPS is an important point. I think units that deal consistent DPS are always easy to tell like if they're strong or not. It's mostly like a board strength check. If they deal in bursts or AoE, AoE is usually weaker early game in stage 2 because there's just less units. And stage 3 is probably better. If they deal damage in bursts, that means like you're pretty much playing off spell rotations and how long the fight lasts. So that might be something that's dependent on your front line, and also if you have like mana items and stuff. And yeah, how reliant is the unit on front line? Some units like do damage over time, and they're only gonna be good if your front line is really strong. Yeah, I think so. A good comparison we can make is between Jhin and Jinx. They're both gunslingers. You'll probably both play them on your board. But say you have a Jhin 2 and a Jinx 1, and you don't know which one to itemize. Jhin has a pretty basic like ability that just says do more damage on your autos for four attacks. It is like a little bit of burst, but you'll probably cast like 2 times in a fight. While Jinx, you need to auto 18 times, and after that, she'll do a lot more damage. So I think clearly like Jinx is a unit that I wish I like had like I played some games where I like thought these examples, but my outplay wasn't working. So I don't have my VOD for Jinx, unfortunately. But I was playing like Jinx, Warwick, duo carry, and Zon pretty much. And like for the first 10 seconds of the fight, it was mostly like Warwick doing all the damage. And then after like 10 seconds, Jinx finally like gets her passive on, and then she pretty much catches up to damage in Warwick. And in the early game, when you play Jinx, a lot of times if your front line isn't good enough, she doesn't even get to attacking 18 times, or if you don't have like attack speed items that helps her get there. So, but I think like in like stage 3, once you get like more units in your front line, you can say you have attack speed items like a Rage Blade or a Kraken or something, then Jinx actually does really well. So I think Jhin is a unit that does a good amount regardless of like how many resources you invest into him. Well, Jinx needs like a lot more investment to pay off well. But like when you do have like the resources, like the tank traits and the items, then Jinx does better. But like in stage 2, probably if you're choosing to itemize between 2, I'd probably choose Jhin. was this? Oh yeah. Here is, so here's just an example for outplayed. I just like had looked through a few VODs for just time examples of this. So like here I have Kiana 2 and GP. They're both Slayers. Kiana's 2-star 1 cost. GP's 3 cost. So I wasn't actually sure like who, like this is like one of my first games and I wasn't sure like who am I supposed to itemize. So you just watch some of the fights. I mean, I like friendly chose Kiana with a sword, but I realized this guy's weak, so I didn't have the Sam. But GP pretty much like will cast his barrel on 3 people, and so he deals his damage in bursts. Well, Kiana is like more consistent because she has a much lower mana cost, but her ability is maximized on her like being able to wrap around and hit like 2 units. Here their damage is pretty equal. I guess like we just stalled the fight here because Kiana got stuck, but yeah, I think like here Kiana is like not really meeting her conditions to outshine GP because she's not getting like her positioning. So that's something you have to keep in mind. Like, if you can position the unit well, or if people are like positioning against Kiana, then GP is kind of like performing just about as equally. And then say in this fight, well, that's not hysterics, but we can kind of compare based on like, imagine if GP had an item or not. But here I think Kiana gets like 2 AoE autos, and she has the item. But like even here you can see like this guy just split his frontline a little, and it's kind of hard for me to get like value on the ability. Well, GP kind of like always consistently hits, but it just kind of depends if you like get enough mana rotations. Here like you end the fight with GP at like half mana, but like Kiana is a pretty consistent damage dealer, so I think with enough frontline, then Kiana will probably outperform GP with no mana items, and even if like you don't always get like the AoE hitting. It probably needs more testing, but I think that's just how I would analyze it, is by looking at the replays and seeing how the units like fight with their mana and their autos each fight, and then just comparing the damage charts. And then here, let me find this other one. Say, I just hit Aesah 2 off the carousel, but have my Giant Slayer on a Jhin. I want to make a Sterix. I'm not sure if I want to use both my removers to put Sterix and GS on the Yasuo. You probably want to do that because you probably need to do that because oh yeah, like stacking items is good. But I just wasn't sure. And so I was just watching this fight to just compare how to deal their damage. He also is similar to Kiana, where he has a lower mana cost. While Jhin deals damage in burst. Jhin doesn't even get to cast this fight, so it's not the greatest example. But then I just swap here, and then I feel like in this fight, a problem is my front line is quite weak, so my Yasuo actually gets hit very quickly. And then the thing is, my Jhin and my Ahri get to get their full spell rotations off before the fight ends, and then their damage actually becomes quite comparable to the Yasuo after, and also of course, because they're backliners, they'll get to live longer than Yasuo. So I feel like this is an example of I guess you compare them with their most of their full spell rotations, and also Yasuo, of course, because he's in the front, he will fight longer. You have better front line, and my front line right now is pretty bad because it's just a 1-star Shen and Xin Zhao. So at this point, in the game where Yasuo is also kind of my tank, I would consider just having not moved this Giant Slayer off my Jhin until the rest of my front line gets stronger. I can level for Loris or I upgrade one of these units. Does anyone have any questions on these? I don't think they're the greatest examples, but they're the ones I could find in my games. So. Okay, I'll continue. Another thing I want to consider is just how the units scale into each stage. So I talked earlier about how Loris, obviously, 2-star 1 cost doesn't get stronger unless you 3-star them, while a 3 cost One star will definitely get stronger once you 2-star it. The question you want to ask a lot is like, can you carry the unit through stage 3, or are you gonna need to replace it? A lot of melee carries, I would say like Kiana or like Briar, they will excel in stage 2 when people have less units, and you can pretty much like trade frontliners, and then the melee unit defeats the backline unit. But in stage 3, people get more frontline, they get more items, and your melee unit usually gets re-aggroed onto. So like a Kiana or a Briar probably doesn't survive throughout the whole fight in stage 3 a lot, and then putting items on them might be worse than putting it on a backliner. Also, thinking about what units that you can play around the carry to like get stronger in stage 3 and 4 is important. Say some units like Jinx, you can only scale with playing Zon units, so it kind of bottlenecks you into the Zon trait because you're probably just playing 2 Gunslinger and then some frontline and Zon. While like say the most flexible trait is like Targon, you have a Felios as an AD carry, you can play him with like anything, and you can play around any other traits. Just being aware that committing to a unit, like committing to Jinx and selling your other options, means you have to play around these other types of units is something you consider when like you like think about what other people in the lobby are playing, or if your items are even good to like carry that unit like Jinx for the rest of the game, or play like the other Zon carries. And then think about why items you need to keep playing around it. Like sometimes you can find yourself early like you don't have the ideal item for a unit, but say I'm just playing like Infinity as Jinx for the time being because she is my strongest AD carry, but Jinx probably wants more like Kraken or something. If you don't find the bows off Krugs, or you don't get the bow off the carousel, and you have like a more flexible AD carry option, then you can consider dropping it because you want to keep like more out to open later, or you don't want a strong, or like you're afraid of having a weak stage 3 because your items are worse for the unit. So yeah, just going back to the first example, like Loris versus Blitzcrank, unless you're like really committed to playing Zon for some reason, I think Loris scales better into later because 1, you can upgrade him, 2, he has built over, which is like a pretty flex trait that you can play like anytime in the game. Yeah, and then I think that is most of the stuff I think about when evaluating units. So pretty much reading the units, looking about how they fight and what they need to succeed in fights, whether it be like frontline, positioning certain items, the fight lasting a certain amount of time, and then thinking about how it affects your future game in the next stages. So this is just an example that I had from a game that I played. Unfortunately, I lost the OBS or the outplayed recording because outplayed just didn't want to run. But yeah. So say you're level 4, and these are the units available to you, and these are the items that you have. Like, how would you figure out what you should play on level 4? Does anyone want to try? Okay.
I would usually assume it's Kog'Maw just because 2-star 1 costs compared to 1-star 3 costs. I usually use gold as a tiebreaker and then star level as a second tiebreaker.
I see. Okay. And then you'd itemize the Kog'Maw, and then
is the target dummy supposed to be items on your bench?
Yeah, that's just the items that you have on your bench. Sorry, I just didn't want to put it directly on a unit.
Yeah, the one thing.
Oh, do you have something to say, Aesah, or should?
Yeah, I will say the one thing is Kog'Maw is like a 3 trait unit, and we're only using one of his. But
yep,
I'm not sure. I would generally assume 2-star 1 cost, not knowing that much about these units.
Also, isn't Kog'Maw I don't remember his ability off the top of my head, but historically, he gets made up as an auto attacker, like an AP auto attacker.
He's not in this.
What is he? What is
he's
his
a caster.
ability?
I think he's like the mythic Kog'Maw, if you
No,
remember way back at like set 12.
he's a caster in the set, and he's not like mythic where he like shoots down the artillery. He just shoots a blob as unit. So
So he just has
yeah.
like a one-off nuke.
Yeah, I mean, I have the abilities on the next page. I was wondering what like people were thinking about. No, they're
I
given
will
the
say,
situation.
having played Zoe yesterday, her AoE early is like really strong. So
Yeah.
hitting like multiple units, I would imagine like if you have good front line, that you might want to just pick her just because she is so strong early.
And Zoe also shreds.
Yeah.
Which that would also mean that some of Zoe's power budget is in that utility as opposed to just sheer damage. I'd be interested in comparing the numbers on Ari and Zoe, because like Ari also has one trait active, like Kog'Maw, but it's half of her traits, not a third. And like I just said, I don't know what her ability does, but it might theoretically be better for like straight damage than Zoe's is. I don't know.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think to their design, I've showed the units here. We read the abilities. I did doing the math at the bottom. I think they're right. Just looking at their base damage, for example, 1-star Ari. I do it in 90 mana because the mana actually works out pretty well for these units. So like Ari on the third cast does her pretty much full rotation. She gets like a big cast. Kog'Maw is, every cast he just like reduces their MR. He also just does consistent damage, and then Zoe in 90 mana gets 2 casts.
Is the Arcanist AP factored into?
Or like, no. This is right now. This is only the base damage on like I just multiplied like the 85 or the 1 or the 200. Right. This hasn't considered Arcanist or the fact that Zoe shreds or the fact that Kog'Maw shreds. But just looking at the base number, like say if we just wanted to compare Ari and Kog'Maw 2, it looks like I think in 90 mana Ari actually does like more damage than Kog'Maw 2, even though Kog'Maw is always like AoEing and hitting 2 units. Kog'Maw's ability does AoE, so that's part of his design also. And they both have Arcanist, right? But Kog'Maw by design, he has Void and Longshot, which are both like things that can give him more damage. So he actually can't like design-wise be that strong because if we only activate one trait, right? So I think between Ari and Kog'Maw, to me Ari is looking a lot better. And then now we have Zoe in the equation. So like, she'll give shred to whoever else you put on your board. So the Ari or the Kog'Maw. And yeah, her damage is actually like very close to Ari's at base, right? Ari of course has Arcanist, so you have Arcanist active, she'll do like more. But Zoe does have like the shred utility and the chill. So I think like laying it all out like this, when you can just read them and also do the math on their abilities, paints a lot clearer picture. And so I think I would definitely want to itemize Ari or Zoe here. I think I might actually like skip out on playing. Also from like playing out fights. Like I play out the fight, and Kog'Maw is not always hitting multiple units, and so without that, his damage is like not that good. And also he does do like flat shred, which can be kind of useful, but like units don't have that much MR anyway early in the game, and Zoe just has like a big shred that you don't even need to cast, like it will apply on the first cast. So I think like with this knowledge, also like, sorry, another thing to note is that Zoe is like what I consider like a burst caster. If you play her in the early game, you'll see she like her cast does a lot of damage, right? To 2 units. It can be a little wasted if like she has a lowest speed unit. While Ari, her damage is like a lot more consistent because she splits her damage into like 3 projectiles or 9 on her third cast. So that's also something to consider. I think with that, like going back to this example, I think I would definitely want to itemize Ari or Zoe. I think at level 4, I'd probably want to itemize Ari because I plan to play Arcanist and she'll do more damage than Zoe and she has more consistent damage. But I think at level 4, I think I might actually want to play Ari and Zoe because they just have really high base damage and Zoe provides shred. And I know I want to itemize Ari on level 5, and then on level 5, I'll play all of them, and I think I'd itemize Ari. That's how I would evaluate it.
So are you not playing the Kog'Maw 2 at level 4?
Yeah, I mean, I probably like maybe want to play this situation out a couple more times, but I think from the situation where I played it and I looked at their damage, I just feel like Zoe is too strong by herself. I guess you can say you itemize Zoe and then like move the items Ari, but I also think like Ari is also strong like by herself, and then like yeah, that's how I would evaluate it. But I honestly like could be wrong, but that is what I got from watching the fights and also reading the numbers and evaluating all the factors that I named before. But I hope that makes sense. And this is for like probably only like 1 or 2 stages in the game, like 2, 2, 2, 3, and then you level to 5 and 2, 5. But yeah, I think Zoe is like so strong in stage 2, it's kind of hard not to play her. Which is like why I would not be playing Arcanist. I'd probably be choosing between on the Arcanist. Assuming that you have to play these frontline units. Yeah.
Would you consider not playing the Jarvan instead?
You could consider not playing the Jarvan. I think like okay, so like I said, I'm just comparing this damage for 90 mana because that's how you like get value out of most of these units. You need to make sure that your frontline is tanky enough for them to get to this 90 mana rotation. So I think that would like looking at the other people that you fight, they would have to have boards that don't do enough damage quickly for them to do that. But I think you probably have to play 2 frontliners just so your units can get like their rotation off. Yeah, no, you can definitely consider playing not Jarvan. Especially maybe you have like I don't know some source of tankiness. Like if like I don't know keepers is in a set, but you have something like keepers, then you can consider something like that. Because you are getting your rotation off. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, here's another example I had from a game. I clicked restart mission and I got aboard something like this. So, and I was playing Salvage Bin and my items at the time were like tier sword, and I have, casters. So I'm just making double Shojin for now. Probably changing it later. So I have two star 3 costs and I have both of their 2 traits active. Actually, for Malzahar, I have Void and Disruptor active, but my Void item is a tank item, so it's not really that important. So I would say it's mostly they have like their 2 traits active. So how we evaluate if I should itemize Milio or Malzahar, and I think these are pretty much the important things. They're important traits to look at and their abilities. Yeah. Does anyone have any ideas?
Well, something I notice about these two is like Milio, his ability is pure damage, whereas Malzahar is like summoning a body, which is like an additional utility element.
I don't think the Voidlings actually tank. Yeah, they're actually just like invisible units, kind of.
Oh, just kidding. Well, then, in which case, the other thing too is those Voidlings are effectively a dot because they're like attacking 15 times or whatever. So it's like pew pew pew, and Milio is a single nuke. Well, 2 like.
Yeah,
And but there is also the utility from Dazzle on the Disruptor.
Yeah.
I think the utility from Disruptor happens anyway, regardless, because it's single target. And with Invoker scaling the Shojins and upfront damage, I would put them on Milio.
Yeah, it feels hard to evaluate without knowing the attack speed of the Voidlings.
That's true. I mean, I think you'd probably treat it like a dot, like previous dots like Verona. I do think like it takes a while for the Voidlings to even finish attacking. Most fights that you play at Malzahar, I think you'll end up seeing a lot of Voidlings left over. So yeah, I think and a lot of good points. I think like Disruptor is a good trait, but it does go off anyway. I do think like whether or not you itemize Malzahar is like if you're against melee carries or something, you should be making sure your Malzahar is placed near like melee carries so that they can dazzle them. Otherwise, you're just kind of reducing the damage of tanks. Invoker does scale well with double Shojin, and I think is a good point. I guess I didn't put on my tank items, but I don't actually have that many tank items right now. I think because there's only like 3-2. So I think Malzahar might do better if you have like a lot of tank items, because it lets the Voidlings do like their whole amount of damage, while Emilio is probably just like on average solid in general because he mostly just deals his full damage in bursts, and I think he uses more of his trait for himself. So, but if the void item were to be for Malzahar, then you probably like pick Malzahar. But yeah. So, I wish I could have better examples or more examples. I mean, I did have a couple more in my outplayed, but just like how you go about these things, like we've done before, we've mostly been reading and looking at the boards, but it's really important that you watch all your fights, and how the units function. Like, if you don't watch your Malzahar every fight, you probably won't notice that his Void Swarm maybe is not hitting their enemy Yasuo or something.
I think it's important to know, like, Malzahar's last cast you can think of as almost doing 0 damage.
Yeah, that too. That's how a lot of dot champions work, right? It's like they do a lot. They should, like, in total, if all their dot damage went through, it'd be higher than like the comparative unit, but that just doesn't happen a lot. So, yeah, and if I have like a lot of mana items and he's casting a lot, then that's probably worse than if I had like 1 mana item plus a lot of tank items for Malzahar. Yeah, so you can learn that by just watching every fight, understanding what's causing them to excel versus be disappointing, whether it be like if your front line's good or if you're positioned well. Look at what interactions have our units. So a lot of units in this set I think have interactions with chill. So you can see like the timing of that works well with like whatever tank and carry you're playing. Also like melee carries, you need to be paying attention to like if they're getting CC'd or not. If they like, because that pretty much determines if you need to build CC immunity or not, or there's a way you can just like position around CC. Such if there's just like things CCs that target like largest clump, if you can like avoid that. And then just like what direction they're targeting goes. Units can be nearest target, current target, random target, or like, yeah, or they'll like shoot an AOE that like goes in different directions, like TF, right? And I think it's really powerful to use VODs and watching replays because you can watch a 30-second fight 5 times, and that's like you just played that round 5 times versus having to load up another game and play that unit and get in that situation again. And I think you can do this for like every unit. There are a lot, especially in like the end game a lot. I find myself just rewatching fights to see what every unit is doing because they do a lot of impact, or even in the early game. Like I think like one example is I had this game. Actually, just rewatched this earlier, where I'm playing like an Noxus board. This is actually the first time I play around LeBlanc, so I didn't even know like exactly what LeBlanc's ability looks like and stuff. But okay, watch this fight out. I feel like my Briar with no items is like still doing a lot of damage compared to my LeBlanc. And of course she like dies first, so like she'll do less damage. But like up until the point where she dies, the Briar is like not doing that much worse than LeBlanc with like 0 items and also 0 traits. Like she doesn't have Slayer. And that's probably because like I actually have a lot of frontline for her to like, and Briar's just kind of a really consistent damage dealer that jumps and gets attack speed. So that's an example of seeing like how Briar succeeds in the fights. I think in other fights you'll probably watch your Briar and she'll jump in and she'll like instantly die because you don't have like a very strong tank, or maybe you like got your tanks aggroed in a bad order and your weak tank died before your strong tank. And that's stuff you might not see until you like rewatch your fights. What I used just now was like the charts in the inspect windows. So, it's really hard to tell how much damage the units are doing every fight, especially like the cadence of their damage, like for burst casters and stuff. Some units like in this set, a big example is just Annie. You can play an Annie and she'll die before she like casts at all, and she'll do 0 damage. But yeah, I think you should use that a lot. Like, I need to make it a better habit too. But like, if you can just open your damage chart or your damage tanks chart every fight and then look at it later because you're also watching the fight, then it'll probably tell you a lot about what every unit is doing. Some units would be doing more damage than you expect, and it can be, kind of surprising. Like, I think, where is it? I know this is like later in the game, but you can be to the same point. I think like here I have, I have a 3-item Graves, a 3-item Yunara, and 3-item TF. My Graves is definitely like the lowest gold unit here. But if I look at his damage charts, he's like not falling that far behind TF and Yunara, which I found like quite surprising. And then I was like, oh, okay, maybe it was like a fluke or something, right? So I like look at the damage chart again, and you just like look at like how they move and how they flow throughout the fight, and like the Graze is still doing like quite well, just for like a 2-star 2 cost versus a 3-star 2 cost and a 2-star 4 cost, and stuff like that I don't discover unless I'm like using my damage charts, right? And you can do that every game and just kind of rewatch it.
Question about your approach to learning all these units and watching them. Is this more of a pattern that you do at the start of a set, or are you like doing it at the start of each new patch when units are modified? Like, what's your process in terms of repeatability of how often you're?
Yeah, I think this definitely happens a lot more at the start of sets. Just learning how every unit works, but and learning about like how their fights go. I think like as the set goes on, units might get patched. Sometimes like builds might appear that you didn't know about before, that like make the unit stronger, like how to carry a unit, right? Sometimes for costs you won't like see a way to carry them that's that strong until like later into the set. And I think pretty much every time you like play around like a new version of the unit, whether it's be like its first version or like a completely different build, doing this is useful just to see like how strong they really are, right? And then like from patch to patch, like you can also use to compare like how much the patch has like really affected them. I think using the damage charts helps there too. Yeah, definitely a lot more early, just to get a feel for all the units and how much of a carry they are. And then later when you're like, I think when you're like trying to really master and dissect certain comps and learn like, oh, like, what's a good duo carry, or like how much is having this important on a unit, like staring at the charts is good for that too. And discovering that stuff, unless you're like a really intuitive genius and combine yourself, you probably won't know until like more stats and guides come out of how to play around those units. But that helps you like fulfill or like learn conditions like itemization and positioning for the units whenever those boards do arise. So yeah. Another thing I didn't show, but you can also use like the unit inspection windows. That's where you like you look at their stats, especially for units that like have stats that change throughout the fight. Like Aatrox will, I think, get more, or just like change based on items. Like Aatrox gets more AD based on lifesteal. Like there's like an Ionia that gives you like more stats based on casts. Stuff like that you can also inspect and get an idea of how strong they're doing. And then to do all these things, I encourage you to just try things out. Swap items between units, swap to different carries. Move for positioning, like move units between different hexes and just try different things to see like what it excels. Like I think something I saw first this set was just like I was playing around TF and he throws like 3 cards out. And I was like, I don't know what is the best hex to put him on, or like what's the best way to position my front line so that his cards hit all the units. So I'll just like try to put him between a bunch of different hexes and then see like what does best, and then I'll look at the replay after. And then instead of like going to a game where like you're just always trying to win and just like play stuff that you already know is strong, like you try stuff out that you don't really know how strong it is, just to like discover more. In the early game, I think there's like lots of novel boards you can make just based on what you hit. So you always want to just try stuff out so that you can better like have that knowledge to navigate future unique novel situations. And remember that everything, like everything in TFT has to do with relativity and context. So something I talked about earlier was like, oh yeah, some units need certain items to be strong. You need to look at your component opener, right? Are you ever going to get to the items that you need for them to be strong? Like say you really need a bow for your Jinx. You didn't start with a bow. Are you even going to be a high carousel or like good carousel pick to get the bow? That can determine whether or not it's even like worth playing the Jinx. Some units are better against melee carries, others are against backline. Obviously there's like units that jump, like Briar. There's like disruptors are better against melee carries because you can dazzle melee carries early. I think burst units are good against melee carries because it's easier to burst them, and also they can't like drain tank you. So that's kind of depending on what your lobby's playing. Units that provide utility, all the target units like Bird, Shred, CC. How you should determine how useful it really is, like in your pool or in your lobby. If no one has a stone plate or no one's playing like Defender, Shred is like less valuable, right? If no one has like healing on their board, Burn like doesn't really do that much unless the fight lasts long enough for like the 2 damage burden to really do much. And then CC, sometimes users CC a tank and then it doesn't matter, right? So those are things to consider also when you're like, this is what you probably consider when you say you're like, maybe I'm on the 3-win, I'm at 2-5, and there's like 2 other people in the lobby at 100 HP. I'm not sure what to put on my board. I should look at their boards and see if they have like healing or resistances to determine like what I should play next on my board. And then you can try to always play the strongest board, but sometimes you can't because of econ reasons. You can't always like play all the 3 costs or the 4 costs that you have, especially because you can't use them all later. So you need to see if like it actually makes a significant difference in your matchups, or you even want to do that. If it doesn't make a difference at all, you win anyway or you lose anyway, then like you should just do what's like in the middle ground that helps you make econ but also keep a strong board, right? And then what's the current meta? Some units are strong, but they don't play into meta lines. Say for some reason Zon is super meta, that you might have a pool to play more Zon units even though they aren't as strong early. And that's just also something to consider, right? In like how you decide your line selection in the rest of your game. And there's tons of other stuff probably, but yeah, remember it always like depends on things, and a lot of questions that you have can be answered, one by reading the unit, by knowing about them, but also by looking at what other people are playing in the game. And that's about it. And it's been an hour. Cool. Does anyone have any questions?
How did you skip the outplay data?
When you get the outplayed ad, you can like skip to a different window and outplay it and come back, and then it goes away. Yeah. Okay, well, I hope this was helpful and informative. Can't really tell. This didn't ask me questions, but yeah.
I got a question, and overall, I thought this was super helpful. One of your slides was questions to answer, specifically, what's the best 3 cost holds? How do you go about answering that question? Do you, like, let's say at the start of the set, are you just going through every 3 cost and watching them in a bunch of fights and then trying to figure that out? Are you looking at the stats, like on a new patch? And then how do you kind of compare that? Like we did some scenarios, like the Loris versus the, I think, Blitz 2 example, but are you kind of doing a comparison of every 3 costs of that role type with every 2-star 1 cost? Like how do you kind of create a tier list for 3 costs and then be able to utilize that to make trade-offs in game when comparing to other 2-star 1-costs?
Yeah, great question. So, multiple great questions. I think every 3-cost deserves to be played once to know how they play, see how strong they are, in fights and stuff. And then, yeah, I think everything here, when considering like the unit strength, is like a relative thing, right? Is X stronger than Y? Because one, you're trying to figure out if it beats other boards, and two, you're trying to figure out, if you should hold it over another unit. So like, let's say for example, like I said earlier, I think Zoe is like too strong to not play in stage 2. I think like she is probably stronger than most 2-star 1-costs. So it would make me think like, oh, if I hold Zoe, then I don't have to worry about having a stronger backline carry in stage 2. Like, so I don't have to worry about holding 1-cost. So I know like holding Zoe, I'll probably be playing my strongest or almost strongest board. And that would make her like an S tier unit kind of thing, right? Which is easy because she's like a Targon unit. I think like, say like for a more fair comparison of like a normal traded unit, like I think Ari, like for our example, deals more damage than Kog'Maw because of his traits. Should deal more damage than Lulu because she has like CC built in her to her kit. But like, so if I would think if I had a 1-cost or a 1-star Ari, then she can probably carry me through stage 2 because I think she is better than 2-star 1-cost, and that's probably what I'm gonna be fighting against. Then I would think Ari is also a really good hold. And there's a situation like, say I had Jinx, she's probably more like context dependent, right? Maybe with like upgraded frontline or certain items, then I would think about holding Jinx from playing her. And so, because of that, I probably have an easier time selling her than Ari. And also like based on like if I can hold Zon units or not. Like, the power of the value of holding Jinx probably also depends on the value of holding Blitzcrank because he's like your Zon tank. So if you don't have any Blitzcranks, then you're less attached to Jinx. So that's another thing to consider. I think when you're looking at tanks, I a lot of them do like pretty similar things. So that also depends on like if one is like a cut above the rest, which from playing currently, I don't know if they are. So it'd probably be, again, like relative to the other units you can play around, like Nautilus, because he has like 2 tank traits, and also he has Bilge Water, which I think is pretty strong early. Might be someone that I like more. I think Sejuani unlocks a really strong 3 trait like Freljord, so that makes her good. I think like Mundo, if you don't have the Zon carry, which is Jinx, probably is not that valuable to hold. Yeah. That I forgot that answers all your questions, but that's kind of how I go through evaluating it, like how much stronger they are than other carries that exist. That I'm okay with like selling other units, and also like how well they do with my items and the other units that I've been offered, or like how flexible they are, right? Or like if they require me to have other units to like be useful. Like Loris, like the thing is, not Nautilus between Nautilus and Loris. Nautilus has Jug and Warden. The only other Warden that you can get early is Xin, which is like, it's not that likely you get 2 costs early. But Nautilus is Jug, so you can get like Briar or Blitzcrank, or you can get Bilgewater going. So Loris, you probably won't get his tank trait as early. So between these two, maybe I'd hold Nautilus unless I thought I had like a good, unless I had like a Caitlyn pair or something, because I can activate Piltover, right? But I think Nautilus is probably like out early game traits like easier to play around than Loris.
A question about I feel like as a default, I tend to assume 2-star 1-cost is better than a 1-star 3-cost. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I also agree as a default they should be, because it should be harder to get a 2-star 1-cost. But I think like for the Kog'Maw example, because of his traits, he's weaker, right? I guess if they are like, if the 2-star 1-cost is stronger, it also depends on like by what degree it's stronger, right? Like because of like what they are stronger at a base, but their trait is like not as strong. Like I think between like Yordle, I pick a different example. That I haven't used. Okay, Sona and Anivia. Wait, no, sorry, those are both 1 cost. Anivia and Milio. Okay. They're both invokers. They both cost 3 gold. Milio, like, Milio is the 3 cost of his trait, so sorry. Let me start again. If you look at the base numbers, I haven't looked at the base numbers, but let's say they're like Anivia is slightly higher, right? I think like the benefit of holding Milio is like 1, you can 2-star him, right? You can always hit like hero grab bag or something. And 2, he is the 3 cost of his trait, so you can activate Ixtal early if you want. So that's probably something that I consider. Like say you're between holding like a 3 cost and 2-star 1 cost, but the the 3 cost scales better, and say you can get away with like a 5 streak easier, and then like or you can get away with a 5 streak with either, and then also like upgrade the 3 cost later. Like that's why I like value the 3 cost, right? Because you can hold them throughout the game. And also if you can play both, right, you just like use your remover later in the game. But yeah, and I think like the 1 cost really depends on how much they're tied down to their traits, or how much they tie you down to their traits, because I think 3 costs usually open you up more to stuff than like 1 cost, because a lot of traits right now are like unlocked by 3 cost. So I think that's another consideration. But yeah, I think at a base, by their damage, the 1 cost should be like a little better.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, let Riffle go, but don't hesitate to ask if you have anything on your mind.
Do you ever FF at 3-2 just to get more repetitions of early game scenarios for new set?
You could. I think right now what I've been doing is mostly just trying to play different openers. Like I think I played like say like this Sona Jarvan opener a lot, so I'm just gonna start like not playing those, like not buying those units or selling them for other units more, and then I'll just go back and replay the fights. If I really want to play like a certain line, especially because of like the unlocks, like say I really want like to try Oriana out, then maybe I could. But no, I usually don't FF in PvE. I think I'll just try to get myself to like play something different and then watch the VOD after. I feel like you mostly need like a couple maybe repetitions of like openers and then watching the replays to see how they work. And then also like another thing I didn't talk about is like you can look at what other people are playing too. Like if you notice that a certain board or certain units are streaking earlier or just like outperforming earlier, and you can see that in your VOD or in your games, then that also like helps you learn, right? So you can technically get like 8 players worth of say stage 2 POVs if you want every game.
Do you think melee carries are better if there are more components in the early game or less?
Do I think melee carries are better if there are more components or less? I don't know about that. I think usually melee carries perform better with items than without, because you can like drain tank, or like I think melee carries usually just have like more damage dealing stats than range carries, because they're melee and they're like put in danger more, so they scale better with items. So yeah, but there's also the other side of like, oh yeah, the enemy will have more tank items, or they'll have like more damage items, so you put a melee carry at risk. But I think in general, I do think melee carries feel better to play when you have items to play them with, in the early game at least. Especially if you can like, if it's not like say everyone gets 5 components, but like say you get an item augment. Yeah, I think melee carries are supposed to be stronger early game. If
Sorry, I
like,
missed this. Did you put like a did you give like your tier list of the current balance of the 1 cost like carries?
no, I don't think I've played enough to like give a a good tier list. I just kind of talked about like my criteria when looking at how strong I think units are.
Makes sense. Any one cost you think are bad?
One cost I think are bad. I was pretty unimpressed with Koguma, but that's kind of by its design. It's kind of hard to activate all its traits.
Or like conditions that make certain ones like good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kiana is gonna be very like positioning important to just get her AoE, and also like you need a good front line. I think if you just have like 2-star Kiana but like 1-star front line, she's like pretty bad. I think actually I haven't played Caitlyn yet. Between like Anivia and Sona, I feel like I kind of like Sona more because and she has to heal, and Anivia kind of needs chill to activate. And Anivia, you can't really activate her trait. It's like harder to activate her trait early. I think Viego is like really strong early because I mean I think by design like he needs to be strong because you have to kind of play around him for a while to get like Shadow Owls online. But he's just like that like attack speed 8 like carry. I mean that just like needs a lot of uptime, which you can get early game when people have like low amounts of damage. So yeah. But I don't know. I think I actually can't really tell what units are like really garbage yet. Yeah. Also, I like Shen as like a secondary tank. Even if you're playing like a stronger bruiser, because Shen just like shields the other unit also. Like I feel like if you're between like you have a Scion on your board and you're between like Shen and like a Laoyi or something, like I prefer Shen because he's actually like a support unit. Yeah.
Which units, kind of like Gragas, the example you brought up, and Loris, maybe across all the cost tiers, have you found most valuable as just standalone throw-in units without any traits activated? Aside from Targon, like
yeah, aside from Targon, yeah. Let's see. I think I actually need to play around this Echo guy more because it's actually hard to like activate his traits, but his ability is like he'll deal. I mean, he deals the amount of damage, but also like he deals damage based on how much damage the target has taken. So like that's like how much other people have taken, or other units on your board have done. So like he might be good. I mean, I think Loris is good. I think Draymond might be good to greed because you can just like farm a gold off of him, and I mean he's just a strong 3-cost AD carry. I think Nautilus. I mean, Nautilus is pretty easy to play based on traits, but I think he actually does a decent amount of damage early with his passive. It just like deals AoE damage based on his MR. So like if you were to like, they're like a level 5 and they're in this situation, if you can like get him in the middle, then I think my Nautilus has done like a pretty decent amount of damage. Let's see. Oh, I guess there are the unlockable units, but I actually haven't unlocked them very much. Like I feel like I haven't played around Kabuko very much, but I'm pretty sure the Yumi
level
effect
7.
is very. Oh yeah, you have to be level 7, so you don't really get them early. I think I don't feel from playing Bard and like the Bruiser reroll comp, but I think if you do find a reason to get Bard, like you have Epoch or something, it's like pretty easy to get Bard. I feel like his base damage is also like pretty high. I guess he's also a threat because he doesn't have any traits. But I mean Jarvan gives your team attack speed, which is quite good. I think like Briar you can probably play on her own. Like I think I showed a clip earlier where my only trait active for Briar was Noxus. So she didn't really have any of her traits active. But like if you have good frontline and 2-star Briar, you can probably just get her to like. I mean, she just gets a bunch of attack speed and AD. So if the boards aren't strong enough to like kill your frontline quickly, then she's probably always gonna do a good amount of damage. Especially if you get her to jump onto their backline. Yeah. What else? There's not that many other units. I don't play around Cho'Gath, but his CC is probably pretty good against melee carries. Yeah. Also, I think like stage 3 4 costs are also like something that you can consider. A lot of them get like 4 costs in stage 3. Like I think the melee units, like Belvin and Aesah, always perform extremely well at 1-star in stage 3. So much that you can probably like take items off and upgrade a unit to put on them because they're just really hard to kill and they would deal really consistent damage. But I know this topic is mostly about low cost units.